Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Socorro Gesha wash processed Guatemala from April Coffee Roasters. And there's the box right there. And this box has definitely seen better days. But April, based out of Copenhagen, Denmark, and they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, including our recent European coffee roaster tier list, where I did have quite a few positive things to say about them. I do have to give a major shout out to and thank you to my good friend Kyle, as he was out in Copenhagen and asked if there was any coffee we were interested in. So not only did he go to April's coffee shop, but he picked up this coffee for us, brought it all the way back to the United States, and then shipped it to us from Colorado. And that's the main reason why this box is a little beat up, and also why the coffee is so late in its roast date. But I greatly appreciate all of the effort that Kyle went through to get us this box of coffee. We could all use a very good friend like Kyle, and I'm definitely looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is actually day 92. And since this is an April coffee, we went with April's recipe on it, which is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 94 degrees Celsius, about 201 degrees Fahrenheit. And of course, I like this one best through the April brewer, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee. Once upon a time, April used to be considered one of the lightest roasting coffee roasters in the entirety of Europe, and I would definitely say that they have since been surpassed by some coffee roasters that roast on the exceptionally light side of things. But I recently heard somebody compare their coffees to Tim Wendelboe's, which I could definitely see a lot of similarities given that they are both on the lighter side of things relative to not just in a bunch of European coffee roasters, but Nordic-based coffee roasters as well. And while they might not necessarily be the lightest out there, I would definitely still consider them to be on the slightly more light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 64. First impression, and we opted for the V60, and the first takeaway I had was that this coffee had a decent level of intensity, especially for it being 2 months past its roast date. And I did mention that we did receive this coffee after a fair bit of travel, and I was very curious to see how it would hold up after 2 months, and I was very pleasantly surprised given that there was just such a nice level of intensity to it from this first try, definitely exceeding a lot of the expectations we had for it going into it. In addition to that, it had a notably well-defined jasmine aspect with some complementary stone fruit qualities, lending itself towards a very nice first impression. And a lot of people know this, when you get a bag of coffee that has been sitting around for quite a while, you can open it up and it can have a nice first time brewing it. But from that point going forward, it can drop off pretty quickly. So I was dying to see how this coffee would turn out on our second try. And on day 67, we opted for the Chemex, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that this coffee had not dropped off whatsoever, as it was still very nice, clean, and intense with plenty of the peachiness and florality to the cup, presented in a much more intense and rounded Central American sense. So this was another very solid day for this coffee. And then we were going to go to day 70, all the way 70 days past, to see if this coffee would still hold up, opting for the April brewer, and unsurprisingly, it had been the best it had been to this point, holding up very well despite its age, as it's continuing to offer a slight bit of traditional Central American qualities in terms of the fruit and floral components presented in a slightly more textured sense. So not only did this coffee have some really nice definition and clarity to it, but it also did give it a little bit more body, so it had just more depth in general. Day 73. To the V60 with April's brew guide, and the coffee was both the best it had been to this point, and it's still holding up really well for what it is, as it does have a slightly more intense candied fruit aspect to it this time around. Overall, a nice level of intensity, sweetness, definition in the fruit and floral sense, and I continue to keep going back to that intensity because not only was I concerned that this coffee might not necessarily have that level of intensity given how old it is, but also because I didn't necessarily know what to expect from this coffee. The first run we had of April's coffees all felt a little bit more toned down and subtle in general, so I was curious to see how this coffee would present itself, and I was very happy with the amount of intensity that it did offer. Day 76 through the Chemex with April's recipe, and this was the most toned down it had been to this point, as it's still offering plenty of the prominent floral components to it, with some fruit qualities as well, but all of which were presented in a somewhat more toned down sense, so I definitely felt like some adjustments were needed. Day 79, through the V60 with our standard recipe, and the coffee does continue to remain pretty nice, offering a significantly more intense experience, but there was a slight bit of robustness to it right off brew, which does go to show that it's not necessarily an extremely light coffee, but even then it still offered plenty of the lighter qualities to it, as it really opens up in a surprisingly clean and pronounced floral and peachy sense, consistent especially in regards to the sweetness and intensity. Day 82 through the Chemex, as the coffee continues to hold up very well, and I continue to go back to that because I fully expected that the coffee would have dropped off at this moment, but it's really seemed to kind of remain consistent throughout the entirety of the time we were working on it. It's best off brew, offering a very nice level of intensity and clarity once again. This time I could even say there was a slight coconut feel, but also plenty of the peachiness to it with an abundance of florality, and I really appreciated the structure that was presented within this one. It's got some excellent flavor separation to it altogether. And then day 85, final notes we have through the April brewer, and the coffee has been pretty consistent, but it also feels maybe a little less intense this time around compared to some of the earlier days. Very nice combination of florality, mostly that jasmine-like sense, melon, peachiness to go with a slight coconut, orange, and candied sweetness, all presented in a pretty clean sense. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5, and that is the cleanliness level 5. So I'm obviously going to be very happy with any coffee that does score level 5 in terms of the cleanliness, as I found this to be an extremely clean cup of coffee. The flavor profiles in it were extremely well defined as well, and it just continued to remain just so clear of any negative aspects to it, enough to the point where I said this is clean enough to justify that level 5, and that's where we decided to put it. Finish level 5. And I do have to say that the finish is kind of interesting because it can come out in a number of different ways. I highlighted that melon aspect on the final day mostly because there were some times where it was a little bit more of a berry-like feel to it. But for the most part, on the earlier days, I was seeing a little bit more of a floral-like experience to it, a lot of the peachiness as well. So it does go to show that there's some really nice depth to the overall finish on this one. Sweetness, level 4, and if I recall correctly, because April does score their own coffees on their boxes, they had the sweetness at a more moderate level there at the level 3, and I didn't necessarily agree with that because I found this coffee to be a lot more sweet than I might have expected going into it, and even then it continued to remain that way throughout the entirety of it. So if they're scoring that at a level 3, I'm kind of curious to see what they might consider a level 4. I remember the bio-innovative coffee that we did review from them had pretty much everything at a level 5, and that wasn't necessarily ideal, but this one right here, I have to say, just really nice sweetness altogether. Acidity, level 4, and that's where we agree a little bit more, as there was plenty of brightness to this one as well, despite the fact that we did brew it with some lower extraction adjustments, and this coffee was as old as it was, which does once again go to show the overall profile of this coffee. Florality, level 4, probably the most consistent and prominent aspect of this one, that jasmine-like sense to it. Definitely quite abundant throughout the entirety. Level 4 certainly justified in that regard. Berry fruit, level 4, and I did mention that there's those slight melon-like qualities and attributes to it, which definitely justified bumping that up a little bit higher. Stone fruit, level 4, I really appreciated the peachiness, but that's no surprise whatsoever. Whenever you're gonna get a level 4 for cleanliness and level 5 for cleanliness and at least a level 4 for stone fruit qualities, then I'm going to definitely enjoy the coffee and the overall experience to it. So very happy with that. We move on to just one level 3, and that is the citrus fruit level 3. So I did briefly mention that there's an orange-like aspect to it, a little bit more of an orange zest, but that was also very enjoyable. It kind of gave the overall fruit experience a little bit more depth. And the final thing worth discussing, body level 2. I did mention that it had just a little bit more structure and texture to it in that sense, and they also have it listed as a level 2 from their own chart on the side of their box. So we were in agreement with that, and oftentimes when it comes to Geshas, you can experience maybe a level 1, that extremely tea-like body to them, but this one had at least a little bit more roundness in general. So as I'm looking at the tasting wheel, I definitely think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This is what I was alluding to when we were discussing them in our European Coffee Roaster tier list. As I mentioned, that I really appreciated that Hacienda La Esmeralda Catuai. I found that to be a very enjoyable coffee, and this is the other one from April that I've had from them recently that I happened to very much enjoy, given just how far past its roast date it is and how nice it still continues to remain. That's a testament to just how well this coffee has been executed, as I found it to be enjoyable throughout the entirety of the time that we were working through it. Then again, it's it's not really surprising given that this coffee is extremely in line with my own preferences, and it's the main reason I asked Kyle to bring us this coffee, because it offered such immense clarity, really nice sweetness, a lot of floral aspects, and some really great fruit qualities as well. The big four things that I'm looking for in a coffee overall. One of the more enjoyable Guatemalan coffees I've had in quite a while as well. That's not too surprising either, given that we've had some experience with other El Socorro Geshas. I'm thinking of the one that we tried from Min-Max, which also turned out to be very nice, as I think this is just one of those coffees that I happen to enjoy regardless of the roaster, but even then, I still think that April did a very nice job with this one. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. I feel like if you also find yourself liking coffees that are in line with my preferences, so that of course being the immensely clean coffees, first place I need to start with that, but also really nice sweetness, a lot of florality, really have to emphasize the florality on this one, and some great fruit depth, and this one has a lot of those characteristics to it, all presented in that slightly more light sense and in a consistent sense. That's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the El Socorro Gesha, wash processed Guatemala from April Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.